When I was young, I believed life was an endless party, easy, effortless, carefree. I grew up in a luxurious home where every wish could come true with just a nod from my father. He had money, a lot of money, and to me, that meant absolute freedom. I didn't have to study hard, I didn't have to work. I woke up late in the mornings, breakfast served to my bed. My days were filled with long hours in front of the TV, and evenings spent roaming with friends through expensive restaurants, dressed in luxury clothing, driving fast sports cars down bright city streets. If I liked something, I didn't need to think twice. Just mention it, and my father would buy it. If I wanted to travel, I packed a suitcase and left. Whenever a new phone model came out, I was the first to own it. I lived as if life existed only in the now. There was no tomorrow. The future was a vague idea. Why worry when my father was always there? I became used to that kind of life, sweet as honey, soft as a silk pillow. I didn't know what the value of labor truly meant, nor did I understand what it meant to earn money through sweat and tears. To me, everything came naturally, without effort, without question. But I was wrong. That evening, just as I was about to head out, my father called me back. He sat quietly in the living room, the soft yellow light casting shadows across his thoughtful face. "Sit down," he said, his voice deep and firm. I raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised, but I sat, because ever since I was a child, my father had never spoken to me with that expression on his face. "You're not going out tonight?" I asked casually, flashing the usual smile I used to ease any tension. But he didn't smile. He looked at me for so long that it felt strange. In his eyes, there was no anger, only a quiet worry, and that alone made me feel a little uneasy. "My son," he said, "you're no longer a child. It's time you thought about your future." I let out a light chuckle, thinking he was exaggerating. "What future, Dad? Everything's fine. I have all I need." He shook his head slowly but firmly. "No, you have everything, because I work hard every day. But I won't be able to do that forever. One day, things might change." I heard his words, but didn't absorb them. To me, the future was something distant and vague. I still believed life would always be easy, just as it had always been for me. I shrugged and smiled faintly. "Come on, Dad, don't worry, nothing's going to change." He didn't reply. He just kept looking at me, for a long time, with an expression I had never seen before. It was both sad and helpless, as if he were trying to tell me something he already knew I wasn't ready to understand. Finally, he said softly, "We'll see." I stood up and walked away without a second thought, my heart as light as if nothing had happened. I didn't know then that those words would be the threshold of a new life, and that threshold was about to open, without warning. The next morning, I still woke up late, just like always. Messages from my group of friends flooded my phone, inviting me out for breakfast, shopping, and checking out a new bar. I yawned, picked the most expensive outfit from my closet, sprayed on a bit of the new perfume I'd bought in Paris, and walked down the stairs with the same excitement I always carried. But my father was already there, seated, dressed sharply in his suit, his expression unchanged from the night before, silent, serious, and full of determination. "Sit down," he said again. I sighed in mild irritation. "Dad, I already have plans today." "That doesn't matter," he cut in. "Come with me, right now." No explanation, no reason, just a car waiting outside and a stare so firm I didn't dare say no. We sat quietly in the car. The morning city passed by outside the window like it always did, but this time it felt different. The car didn't head toward the busy city center. Instead, it turned into streets I had never set foot on. Old buildings, run-down markets, sidewalks filled with people working hard to survive. Everything looked like a completely foreign world. The car stopped in front of a small fruit stall. A thin, middle-aged man was carefully arranging apples into a basket. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His hands were rough, but every motion was steady and practiced. "He's been up since before dawn," my father said, eyes fixed on the man. "He works all day. No complaints, no rest, just enough to feed his family." I said nothing. For the first time, I looked at a laborer without detachment. Then my father took me to an old tailoring shop. Inside, an elderly woman with silver hair was sewing, focused on every stitch. The soft yellow light cast over her wrinkled face and trembling hands. She was tired, but she never paused. "She's been doing this for over 40 years, my father said. "She's not rich, but she's resilient." I swallowed hard, looking at the old woman as if I had just discovered a world I had been deliberately ignoring. My eyes met my father's. He asked gently, "Now do you see? Life isn't easy for everyone." I didn't answer. I looked down. For the first time, something stirred inside me. I didn't know if it was shame, realization, or something like growing up. The ride continued in silence, but within me, something had quietly begun to break open. The car stopped again, this time in front of a tall, familiar building, my father's company. I had been there a few times before, always just to ask for money or to wait while he finished a meeting so we could go out for lunch. But today, something felt different. My father said nothing. He stepped out of the car and walked straight into the building. I followed behind, puzzled and unsure. People bowed their heads as he passed, just like always. And me, I felt lost in the middle of the busy crowd racing against time. Phones ringing nonstop, printers whirring, conversations buzzing, footsteps echoing fast and loud, like a symphony I had never heard before. He led me to the upper floors, walking down a gleaming corridor, then opened the door to a room. It wasn't his luxurious office. It was a small, brightly lit room filled with rows of desks, computers, paperwork, and people hunched over in concentration, eyes fixed, hands flipping pages, faces drawn tight. He turned to me and said simply, "Starting tomorrow, you'll be working here." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Work? Me?" He nodded, unwavering. "Yes, from tomorrow on, you'll be an employee, just like everyone else. No special treatment, no shortcuts." Before I could even react, he handed me a small notebook, a work log. In that moment, everything I knew about life seemed to collapse. I was someone who spent money, not someone who earned it. I was someone who enjoyed life, not someone who worked for it. And yet, now, I stammered, I don't know how to do anything." My father looked at me, not with anger, but with quiet certainty, as if stating a simple truth. "Because you've never had to learn, but now you will, from the beginning." I stood frozen in that room. The tapping of keyboards, the hum of the copier, the quiet sighs of the workers, they all grew louder, more real than ever before. I understood then. This wasn't a test. This was the beginning of a completely new life. And I had no choice but to walk through it. The next morning, for the first time in many years, I didn't sleep in. The alarm rang at 6:30. I lay still in the dark, eyes wide open, a strange feeling filling each breath. There was no knock on the door from the housekeeper, no breakfast brought to my bed, no freedom to decide what luxury I'd spend money on today. I put on a dress shirt and long pants, staring at myself in the mirror, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. As I walked downstairs, my father was already waiting. He didn't say much, just handed me a small bag. "Your lunch," he said. I looked at it as if it were some foreign object. "I'm not eating out." He shook his head. "Workers don't eat at restaurants." The car stopped at the company. This time, he didn't take me to the upper floor. Instead, he led me straight into the same crowded room we had visited before. A serious-looking man with glasses walked up to us. It was Mr. William, the head of the auditing team. "This is who you'll report to," my father said, then turned and left without looking back. Mr. William didn't shake hands, didn't smile. He just nodded and said, "Follow me." He brought me to a small desk in the corner of the room. On it was a towering stack of papers that made me dizzy just looking at them. Mr. William pointed at it. "Go through all of this, check the numbers, mark the mistakes." I sat down, barely able to gather my thoughts. The numbers danced in front of my eyes, rows and columns, invoices, codes. At first, I thought, this'll be easy. But after just 1 hour, my head felt like it was about to explode. My eyes burned, my hands ached, everything looked the same. I glanced around. No one was talking, no one was resting, everyone was working like every second truly mattered. I had never been anywhere so dull. I had also never felt so small. By noon, I opened the lunch bag. Inside was a simple meal: white rice, a fried egg, some boiled vegetables. No fancy juice, no gourmet dish. I ate in silence, eyes observing those around me. They ate quickly, spoke a few words, then returned to work. No luxurious coffee, no joyful chatter, just urgency and responsibility. I started missing my old life, the ease, the comfort, the carefree afternoons and glittering parties. But I also felt something unfamiliar begin to stir inside me. For the first time, I felt respect, not just for those around me, but also for the very work I was doing. It was small, tiring work, but it was work that people gave their lives to, and now I was part of that. That afternoon, Mr. William came by to check. He frowned. "Mistakes. Do it again." I wanted to argue, to walk out, but instead, I just sighed, nodded, and began again, with tired eyes and numb fingers. When the clock finally struck the end of the day, I stood up, exhausted, but strangely light. Something had changed, something small, but real. My father was waiting in the lobby. He looked me over and asked, "Tired?" I nodded. He smiled. That smile, simple, wordless, somehow warmed me from the inside out. And for the first time in my life, I smiled back at him. Not because I had received something new, but because I had just learned my very first lesson: the value of hard work. Time passed quietly, day by day, then week by week. I no longer counted the calendar waiting for weekends, nor did I scroll through my phone just to look for places to be entertained. Every morning, I put on my shoes, slipped on my jacket, and carried the lunch bag my father prepared, as if it were a small ritual. No one had to remind me to work. I stepped into the rhythm naturally, as if both my body and mind had grown accustomed to a new way of life, the rhythm of a working person. I worked faster, made fewer mistakes, and most importantly, I started to feel proud of the small tasks I used to look down on. Mr. William, as usual, kept his face cold as ice, but lately I began to notice that whenever he leaned over to check my documents, he didn't frown immediately anymore. One day, he even muttered, "No errors," then walked away as if he was surprised himself. In that moment, my heart seemed to skip a beat. One Friday afternoon, as everyone was tidying up their desks to go home, Mr. William came over to mine. Holding a fresh stack of files, he stopped, looked at me for a few seconds, and said, "You did well this week. You're starting to understand the job." I didn't know how to respond. I just gave a small nod. But inside, his words echoed like a melody I had never heard before, a melody of recognition. That evening, as I stepped out of the building, I saw my father waiting, still at the usual spot, leaning gently against the car. He didn't ask, "How was your day?" anymore. Instead, he just looked at me closely, then nodded slightly. "Tired?" he asked. I nodded. "That's good," he replied, then turned his face away, but I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, something like quiet joy. I got into the car. We didn't say a word, but I knew, for the first time, he was truly proud of me. Not because I was brilliant, not because I was rich, but because I didn't give up. I did something he once thought I lacked the patience to do. And the strange thing was, I was starting to feel proud of myself too. One evening at the end of the month, just as I was leaving my workspace, my father called me up to his office. I still remember the feeling as I stood in front of that door, a door that had once been so familiar, but today made me feel a little nervous. Inside, my father was sitting behind his desk, holding an unopened envelope in his hand. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked up at me, with a gaze both quiet and deep, as if he were seeing a completely different person from the boy he had once worried himself sick over. I stood still, waiting for him to speak, and then he said, "You've changed." I pressed my lips together, unsure whether to agree or deny it, but he didn't need an answer. "When you started, you were lazy, impulsive, and lived in a fantasy. I was afraid you would never understand the value of labor, of responsibility. But now," he opened a drawer, took out a small key, and gently placed it on the desk. I looked at it, frowning. "What is this?" "Your office," he replied. I froze. "Mine?" He nodded. "It's not big, just enough for a desk, a chair, and a pile of responsibilities. But it's something you've earned, not because you're my son, but because you've worked to deserve it." I stepped forward and slowly picked up the key. Small, cold in my hand, but heavy, heavier than any expensive gift I'd ever received. Because for the first time in my life, I understood. It wasn't just a key, it was trust. The next morning, I didn't go to the familiar corner desk in the auditing room. I went to the third floor, where the row of offices for junior managers was located. My office was at the end of the hallway. When I opened the door, there was only a desk, an empty bookshelf, and a small window overlooking the street. It wasn't luxurious, it wasn't impressive, but it was mine. I sat down, opened my laptop, and placed my hands on the cold surface of the desk. I was no longer the spoiled boy running away from responsibility. I was learning to lead, learning to make decisions, learning to face mistakes. I knew there would be exhausting days, moments when I'd want to quit, times when I'd make serious errors. But this time, I wouldn't run away. Because now I understood everything of value in life doesn't come easy. And now I was ready to build something of my own with these very hands. Months passed. I no longer counted time by days, but by the number of mistakes I made and how I stood up again after each one. The work didn't get any easier, but I no longer felt discouraged. Every wrong decision taught me a lesson. Every late night at the office helped me understand responsibility more clearly. And every time I saw my team struggle because of a plan I had created, I understood more deeply that being a leader wasn't about sitting at the top. It was about carrying the weight of everything on my shoulders. I learned to listen instead of command, learned to apologize instead of making excuses, learned to lead with humility, not with the title of the boss's son. One late evening, when only a few windows in the office still glowed faintly, my father stopped by. He came in silently, as he always did. I was bent over my desk, trying to fix a rejected budget proposal. "Still here?" he asked. I nodded. "I want to finish the revision before morning." He didn't answer, just stepped closer, standing behind me for a long while. Then, in a slow voice, he said, "I used to think maybe you would never understand, but now I know you've truly grown up." I turned around. In his eyes, I didn't just see recognition. I saw trust, the kind of trust I had once lost in his gaze and now had regained, not through promises, but through action. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old leather notebook, the one he used to take notes during company meetings. He placed it on my desk and smiled. "It's yours now." I couldn't say a word. Holding the notebook in my hands, I felt something different flowing through me, heavier than money, deeper than status. It was inheritance, but this time not given because I was his son, because I had earned it. I looked out through the glass window. The streets below still sparkled with light. People were still out there, chasing their dreams. And me, the one who used to live as if the world existed to serve me, now only wanted to live a life that meant something. I was no longer afraid of tomorrow, no longer running from the future, because now I finally understood. Life isn't easy, but that's exactly what makes it worth living.